Welcome back, everyone, to a brand new episode of the Crypto and Muay Thai podcast. I am very, very excited today to welcome our guest, Richard Smith. He is the founder and owner of the Bad Company Gym based out of Leeds, England, and is well known for training some of the UK's best Muay Thai champions, with the most notable individual amongst the roster today, obviously being Liam the Hitman Harrison. Richard, it is a pleasure to have you on the podcast today. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
Hi, yeah, good. Thanks for having me. Nice to meet you.
Excellent, excellent. So for those who might be listening to the podcast that might not know who you are, just give them a quick 2-minute background of who you are, your experience and how you became to be the individual that you are today, pumping out, champions within the Muay Thai sphere over in the UK, but also globally as well.
Yeah, I started Muay Thai in 1986, so some time ago now, at a time when it wasn't really a thing in the UK. There were probably one or two gyms. Master Toddy and Master Sken were over here from Thailand. They just brought it here. I was probably what you'd call a second generation. They'd already brought some instructors through from sort of the early 80s, 83, 84 at a time. And I moved into the sport just after them. I had my first fight in 1987 when I lived in Sheffield, and then moved away from Sheffield to Leeds in 91. Started Bad Company in 91, 92, and for a while just a local gym. Had a few people who wanted to compete. At the time, there wasn't even that much in terms of competition going on in the UK, probably 3 or 4 events each year to put fighters forward for. But the sport started to grow. My wife Lisa came to the gym in 92 as well, so that's where we met. For a while it was just me and her travelling the country representing Bad Company and building the name of the gym. After that, obviously we got next generations of fighters through, including the ones like Liam Harrison, Andy Howson, Jordan Watson, Richard Cadden, built up a number of notable fighters from there. So the gym started in 92, first fighters out of the gym probably 94, and the rest is history. Here we are, however many years later.
So starting Muay Thai in the 80s, especially in Western society, is 100% like sort of pioneering ground. So I completely see that and respect that, because even in the US, which is further behind the UK or Europe for that matter, in terms of Muay Thai development and sophistication, even the mid 90s, late 90s is still very, very early stage. So for the fact that you were not only practicing in Muay Thai, but also competing in the late 80s is quite impressive, and definitely pioneering on the particular, on that particular scene. So
yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry, go on.
No. Go ahead.
We at the time, I don't think what we did really was what you would call Muay Thai. We didn't even, we'd call it Thai boxing. It was kicks and punches. It was kickboxing with knees, really. We didn't understand the scoring. We didn't understand the clinch. At the time, going to Thailand and training in a camp in Thailand was a very rare thing. You had to get with an invitation. You had to, you couldn't just turn up. It was very different to how it is now, where you can book your holidays and just go turn up at a gym and train. So we learned from Thais who came over here. In some ways, the Thais who came over here watered the sport down a little bit, made it what they thought was more palatable for the Western palate, for the Western way we did things. They didn't introduce gradings, they introduced a lot more formality into the sport. The fighters that were coming out of the UK then were very good, very tough, but it was more boxing and kicks. And when we were fighting against the Thais in those days, Master Toddy and Master Skem both did big shows where they were bringing Thais over. The Thais would come over and just just batter the UK fighters. We'd be there with boxing for 2 rounds doing all right and then get kicked to pieces. So it was a big learning curve. It was only really, I would say, late 90s, early 2000s that the sport started to properly develop as what we call Muay Thai in the UK. A guy called Tony Myers came along, and he'd done a lot of research into how Muay Thai was scored so that he could develop ways of training that we could compete with the Thais. And, so there's no point in me teaching the sport and then everybody, when they're competing, has no idea why they're winning, why they're losing. He looked at judging and refereeing and officials and built up a generation of people who understood the sport a lot more. And that is what really, I think Tony Myers made the biggest difference to the UK Muay Thai scene than anyone ever has, really. Since then, we've been going to Thailand a lot more. Most of our coaches and fighters now spend multiple months each year in Thailand learning. We're bringing Thais over here to the UK, although that's more difficult now with visas. But certainly there's been more of a history of that. So the sports, I would say, developed. What we did in the late 80s and early 90s was good. It got me where I am now, but I think I've probably learned more in the last 10 years than I did in the 20 before that.
So from an individual like yourself, that's incredibly amazing to hear, and also great for some of the listeners, especially whether they be novice or even intermediate fighters, coaches, what have you. The fact that you have been in the game for 30 years and the most recent 1/3 is where you've done majority of the growth, and obviously you're still learning to this day. I think a lot of people get in the mindset of, exiting beginner's mind, where they think they know everything. And especially new people who walk in the gym, it's like, well, I want to know everything. It's like, I don't know everything and I will never know everything. It's like, you are someone that probably forgot earlier this morning, more about Muay Thai than I've gained over the 15 years that I've been training in it, but also competing in it in a very small subset of that as well. So I think that's incredibly powerful for people to hear, is that the constant evolution of growth, not just as a fighter, but also as a coach as well, is absolutely paramount. With that said, you were talking a lot about judging and scoring. So were the techniques something that were watered down initially by the Thais as well, because of what they thought would be more palatable to the UK audience or the European audience? Or was it just something to where the Europeans kind of leaned on what they were best at? So obviously boxing being a little bit more prevalent within Western sports, you see more of that until obviously you hit that inflection point where they realize that if I'm going to try to touch you with punches, but I'm getting my legs battered, unless I can knock you out in the first round or the second round, I'm not going to make it the full 5 rounds that there is in a Muay Thai competition.
It was more the techniques, what scores in a fight. I think what you have to think that in the UK and in the States, in Europe, we have a big history of boxing, of Western boxing, of traditional boxing. So your average man in the street, your average Joe, understands the way boxing is scored, understands the round by round scoring, understands watching a 12-round fight and knowing that whoever's won 7 rounds is more like as was won the fight. So when you bring a sport that's similar in that you're wearing gloves and it's in a ring and there's rounds and all the rest of it, but different because of the way it's scored and the way the techniques that we use. What happened, I think, was that the man in the street, the people who were taking part in the sport, lent on and relied on our understanding and our conditioning of what we knew, which was the boxing style of things. We didn't really learn about, techniques that scored, body kick, knee to the body. We didn't learn that, actually the fights doesn't have to, it's not a paper exercise. So just because you've won round 1 and 2 doesn't necessarily mean you're ahead going into round 3. You can win round 3 by a big margin and cancel out those rounds. There's a more subtlety or different subtlety in the scoring and in what scores. So what happened is you get your Western fighter going out there and throwing 500 punches in the first 2 rounds, punching the Thai in the face, but the Thai wouldn't particularly show any great effect from being hit because they were tough, because they were strong, because they were absorbing the shots. The crowd in the UK would be, hey, we're winning. And then the Thai start chopping a few kicks in. If you get Thai judges, then the punches that have had no effect aren't going to score. The kicks that, even if aren't having as much effect, the kicks are going to start to score. And 3 or 4 good body kicks in a round, you've turned it round. You're going to be the winner. So what would happen is at the end of the fight, the 300 punches that had landed in the face but not really had a great effect, not the Thai off his balance, not stopped him coming forward, not had any effect, would be negated by the body kicks and the knees, and the Thai would win if he'd not smashed the guy's arms to pieces or legs to pieces to the point where he couldn't continue, which obviously happened quite a lot. And I think what happened is it probably held itself back because people didn't and probably still don't understand that scoring method, that scoring ethos. So you get your man in the street, if you like, going to Muay Thai shows, watching a fight and not really understanding why blue corners won and red corners lost, when actually red corner was the one going out there being more aggressive and throwing more punches. And that's probably why MMA's overtaken our sport, because possibly a little bit more akin to the boxing style of scoring. It's each blow that lands scores, whether it's had an effect or not. In Muay Thai, it can land. If it's not affected your balance, if it's not affected what you were trying to do, if it's not changed anything about your how you're fighting, then it's not really scoring. And that's the whole point about Muay Thai scoring. It's a more pure way of scoring a fight, because it's the winner is the one who's having the most effect on their opponent. In boxing, the winner is the one who touched the opponent the most times or hit the opponent the most in the target areas. It's just a different way of looking at it.
I think that's a great way to put it, but also framing it from a conceptual perspective for the man on the street, like you were talking about, or the lady on the street. I think that actually makes tons of sense. And I know for me personally, especially whenever I meet new fighters or people from other gyms that maybe don't have a traditional Muay Thai background like myself, I see a very similar mentality approach whenever we're sparring, that it's very much like boxing, and it's not about damage. And one of the things that you were sort of talking about was having their arm smashed or having their leg smashed. And a lot of times I see people just blocking, not even, Dutch style, but just taking it flush. And I always tell my fighters, take that all day. Just keep smashing that arm until they can't lift it. And I think, again, it kind of revolves around that ethos that you're talking about, of understanding the full complexity of damage done to the opponent, as if you're actually trying to impose your will and or stop them from a variety of the Muay Thai attacks, which I call the heavy artillery. It's like you go through your script of heavy artillery based upon what your opponent's doing with punches, and then you look to teeps, and then you can go to your kicks, and then you start going to knees, and then elbows, and then clinch work. So it gradually gets more and more heavy as you kind of go along the list, but also whatever your particular fighter is bringing towards you. A Muay Thai type fighter, you're going to need a lot more heavy artillery to keep them off of you, versus someone like Muay Thai that wants to kind of play the chess match with you as well. You alluded to one thing, talking from a scoring perspective as to why MMA has taken over Muay Thai, which I totally agree, and it infuriates me. But one thing that ONE FC is doing, which obviously with Liam fighting over there, is they've introduced the MMA 4-ounce gloves into the Muay Thai arena, which I personally love, because it takes out a lot of the gaming of what you see from Dutch style fighters, where they're using their glove as the shell, but then also it keeps a lot of the Thais honest whenever they get a little sloppy in their long guard. Do you think that's something that can be adopted with other organizations within Muay Thai? Because it doesn't change the scoring system, but it changes the potential outcome to where getting touched up with a 4-ounce glove is going to be different, and it might change your game plan more quickly versus, you know, an 8-ounce glove or a 10-ounce glove that might typically be indicative of a regular sanctioned Muay Thai match.
It changes the rhythm of the fight. Wearing those gloves, if you look at one championship scoring, is very much more like your traditional boxing scoring, like your like your K1 scoring, as in each blow scores pretty much equally. So a punch landing on target will score the same as a kick landing on target, and really it's the aggressive fighter who lands the most effective, but lands the most blows. The thing is, obviously, wearing a pair of 4-ounce gloves, it's going to be a lot easier to have an effect when you land a punch. If you're wearing 8 or 10-ounce gloves, you can walk through boxing a little bit. You can take a few shots to give a few shots. In an MMA setting or in a Muay Thai with MMA gloves on setting, you can't do that. You can't be taking shots. You know, you get your face smashed to pieces. You're going to get cut. You're going to get, you know, hurt, and it's going to have an effect even in a 3-round fight, which obviously did not got the duration. So it changes the rhythm of the fight. In some ways, it can make the fight less exciting because the fighters want to stay away all the time. They're not going to try and get stuck in. They're staying on the outside all the time, trying to stay on, you know, trying to stay away from those. Like having a bare knuckle fight. You know, the bare knuckle boxer isn't going to want to get stuck in there and risk taking a couple of shots, even if it means he can give some back. So in that way, it can change the rhythm and the mentality of the fighters. I think what happens is the fighters tend to be like that for the first round, and then they forget that they've got the little gloves on and just go for it. And the later rounds can be pretty mad. And again, I think that's probably why it's mostly, other than for the title fights, only 3 rounds, because I think 5 rounds with those gloves on would be, you know, fighters taking too much damage, in all honesty. I like both formats, but with the small gloves on, it's not Muay Thai, because, as I say, if it's about effect, it's about shots landed, or it's about shots landed, then the smaller gloves are going to favour the shots landed and the effect more. Whereas you can wear bigger gloves, and it's such a different rhythm to the fight, really. We were talking about, you know, kicking across the arm. Well, in a Muay Thai fight, getting kicks across the arm a couple of times, I'm going to lose you the round. That's why we when a couple of kicks land, you know. You need to deal with that. I say to my students all the time in the gym, you got kicks across the arm, you're losing the round. You need to get one back, or you need to knock them backwards and have an effect yourself. Because a couple of times getting kicks across the arm, that's a score. That's a big score in Muay Thai. Getting kneed in the body, that's a big score in Muay Thai. That happens to you. You need to pull it back, and you're constantly thinking about where you are on the scorecards. Whereas really in the one championships, or the K1, or even the boxing style of judging and fighting, get kicks across the arm, punch to the face, even Stevens. In Muay Thai, get kicks across the arm, you're behind a long way. You need to land 3 or 4 big shots, snap the head back. So, you know, the rhythm of the fight's very different. In one championships, it's still about damaging the opponent, really. It's the guy who comes out with the most damage, or inflicts the most damage, has won the fight. The guy who is the most damage has lost, really. So probably easier to understand, again, for, if it's not a patronising expression, the man on the street, you know.
Got you. So you think the current one format that might be a little bit more conducive, not to traditional Thai, Muay Thai in and of the sense, but maybe Western style fighters, given they have a familiarity with punching more, to be able to, you know, clip the Thai coming forward, or the more traditional Thai fighter where they're on that rhythm, but their head isn't really leaving the center line too much. So do you think that style might be a little bit more advantageous for the Western fighter, or again, it's just a completely different rhythm and it kind of depends on the fighting styles versus one another?
I think you've got different fighting styles versus one another, which makes it interesting. But what I think is that what I think it's showing now, because you look at the top level ties in one championships are still dominating it really. I think what that shows you is that the Muay Thai way of fighting and scoring can be adapted very easily. You look at Borkow going into K1 Max and stuff like that. He dominated that and he won that, even though it was not the style he's been brought up with, because the Muay Thai way of training and scoring can be adapted very easily to suit different things. And just because they're working in a much more of a points dominated effect type format doesn't mean that they can't turn it on and actually get stuck in and have a bit of a war now anyway. You look in the stadiums in Thailand now, the fights are very much more boxing, low kicks, fighters trying to smash one another to pieces. It's not your fighters standing off trying to pick the win by landing more body kicks as much. So I think the Thai style and the Thai fighters can adapt a lot more, and that's something I've tried to emulate in my gym. When we go to Europe, we have to look at what the judges are going to be looking for when we go. My fighters do fighting. We fought on Glory, we fought on Infusion, we fought in one championships. It's not only traditional Muay Thai that we've done, so you have to learn to adapt to all of those things. If you can punch hard and you can kick hard and you can defend well, most formats of judging are going to be okay, because you know it's not that different. It's not like some sort of voodoo Ouija sort of, nobody's ever going to possibly understand Muay Thai scoring. It's totally different. A fight's a fight, and usually 99 times out of 100 you know who's won the fight at the end of the fight, because it was a fight, and the winner's pretty obvious. Sometimes you could say, if it was in Muay Thai scoring, maybe he'd have won. But on the kickboxing or boxing scoring, he'd have won. But that's not usual. Usually he'd have won under that scoring, or he'd have won under that scoring. So, there's not as much sort of magical difference as people like to try to make out, I think.
Got you. I think one of the things that you said there it reminds me of something I talked about with Brandon Six Gun Gibson, the striking coach for John Jones, on the last Muay Thai podcast, was having fighters have the mentality, or being able to give them the maximum amount of tools so that they can be their own artists in the ring. So Floyd Mayweather-esque, to where I don't train for a specific fighter. I train to get myself ready for a fight, because I know I have all the skills to be able to handle whatever this particular fighter or their game plan is bringing towards me. And how you sort of articulated the Thai style, I'm traditional Muay Thai, so I agree with you 100%, and I'm probably biased, but being able to have those foundations in all the facets that you would see, anything that they sort of go to, whether it's K1 or any adaptation, it's just either a slightly watered down version of Muay Thai, so it's going to be safer, easier to adapt to, or maybe it's just a simple adaptation of your style. So Nongo is one of my favorite Muay Thai fighters right now, and it's because he's made the adaptation to the small gloves and one so easily, where literally all he's done is just have to keep the sort of like his recognition of his hands of a little bit of a higher guard, because he's got the smaller gloves and does a little bit less of long guard now. So I agree with you. I think having that entire element, or the tools to succeed or protect yourself no matter where the fight goes to, is incredibly powerful. With that being said, do you have any MMA fighters within Bad Company's stable right now? And if so, or even if not, do you see like that applicability for the Thai style to make its way more and more into MMA? And I'll say the Thai style because what we see a lot of times in MMA right now, again, is a little bit more reminiscent of what you guys were doing back in the 80s, in the 90s. It's not traditional Muay Thai. It's very watered down. And obviously it can't be traditional Muay Thai given the takedowns, but there's still a lot of bad technique that I see, but also there's a lot of misunderstanding where they actually think that they are doing Muay Thai techniques, but they're actually, really not. They're more reminiscent of kind of, again, of what you guys were doing back in the late 80s, early 90s, stuff like that. So
Yeah,
go ahead.
yeah. Well, going back to what you're saying about preparing for a fighter, and like Floyd Mayweather, does he train particularly for their style, or does he just do his own thing? That's my belief is you don't need to worry about what they're going to do to you. You need to worry about what you're going to do to them. And whilst you're training for their style, they're training for yours. So at the end of the day, there's very little point working your weaknesses. There's no point trying to become a fighter that you're not, because you think that will beat a person who's training to fight you, because they're going to be presumably getting as good as they can be at their game. You just need to get as good as you can at your game, and that should beat them. If you're training in a way that if you're a really good kicker and you're going to fight a boxer, you're not going to go out there to fight like a boxer. If you're a really good clincher, why would you fight to stay on the outside because that guy's good on the outside? You're going to make him worry about you rather than you worrying about him. So that's how I see it. Transferring it to MMA, I have MMA fighters who come to me to train their striking and train their stand-up. We don't have any bad company MMA fighters in our gym because we're not an MMA gym, but I do have a lot of fighters who come to me to work their stand-up. I recognised that was happening a couple of years ago and realised that I needed to get an understanding of the groundwork and how they're going to be thinking. So I started doing a bit of BJJ. I did some gi and some no gi and some sort of MMA style training as well, just to I'm not for me to compete now. I'm too old for that, but just to have an understanding of it. And it changed my way of coaching those guys. Muay Thai can be much more upright, much more this rhythm, whereas an MMA style is you need to be a little bit lower center of gravity. Your movement needs to be different, partly because of the little gloves. You don't want to get smashed in the face by those. Partly because of the takedowns, and partly because you're in a cage, not a ring. That makes a big difference as well. If you're in a ring, you can use the ropes. You've got a bit of give in those ropes. You can move off. A cage, it makes life completely different. Somebody's trying to take you down and shoving you against the cage walls. You have to have a different game. So footwork becomes different. The rhythm, again, I keep saying about the rhythm of the fight becomes different. And that's something that we need to learn. I personally don't think there's any more effective way of using your hands, using your kicks, using your knees, using your elbows than Muay Thai. That's the styles that are really the most effective way of kicking. That's why, you don't suddenly see a Muay Thai fighter kicking like a Kung Fu fighter or a Taekwondo fighter or something like that. There's a way of doing it that's more effective. If I want to punch you in the face, I'm going to lift my hand, I'm going to punch like that. That's the best way. I'm not going to start doing all this business because it's, doesn't work. Or it works if somebody's doing that to you, if they're the rules of what you're doing. That Taekwondo or karate is the great sports. I'm not saying they're not, but in a ring situation, that's the best way of doing it. But what you do need to do is change your footwork, change your stance, you need to relax a bit more, move a bit more. And they're all things that, and be aware of the takedowns and the attempted takedowns and stuff like that. Traditional Muay Thai clinch is brilliant, but doesn't really work the same in MMA because it's too upright, and pulling down is a bad thing to do because you're going to get taken down. So we need to be aware of all those things. Having said that, I think the knee in the clinch is something that MMA fighters don't use enough. If you can get control of your opponent and knee them, then that's something that we can do. So I have certain theories and certain ideas about how Muay Thai can translate to MMA that I actually don't see enough in other MMA coaches and other MMA fighters.
Um, there's two things you said in there that I find incredibly interesting. So we train a lot with MMA gyms, or our MMA gym back in Pittsburgh, and our particular segment of the country, Western Pennsylvania, is known for breeding amazing wrestlers. So a lot of the top wrestlers historically that you would see, I won't ramble names, but a lot of them come from this particular like hub, but also a little bit further to the west in the Midwest area. And what I've seen with our wrestlers in MMA training is that, yes, the applicabilities of the Muay Thai clinch, like it's not apples to apples, but that general feel actually works a lot better on wrestlers than I think a lot of people give it credit for. So yeah, you can't stand up super, super high because obviously they can just change levels and take you down. But having that control, strong neck, even not the traditional Thai clinch, but maybe half clinch, maybe gable grip, maybe, sort of like Manus grip, like that works incredibly well. And even if you do get the full Thai clinch, as long as you have the elbows in, you still get that sensory feel whenever they're about to change levels and maybe go for a single or double. So I've actually felt that the background that I had in clinch has helped out going against wrestlers a lot because I'm used to that push and pull, but also because I'm used to the Thai pulls, my feet are quite mobile. So if I feel them overweight for a single, I can instantly sort of like move that foot as if I were grabbing and pulling in the Thai clinch in a very traditional manner. So it's interesting to hear your perspective on it, and then also my perspective, seeing with the wrestlers as well. But one thing that we do agree on is the knees in MMA 100% are not utilized nearly enough, and nor are they particularly good. But also one of the things, elbows as well. So I'm sure you've seen it with a ton of MMA people that are not trained well in Muay Thai. Whenever they start getting touched up with knees, they'll take their arms and just put them down. And whenever you start doing that, then you get opened up for elbows. And people that are trained well, like Peter Yan, not his most recent fight, but his one with Uriah Faber, he did the same exact thing to where he's touching him up with knees. Faber puts his hands down, and then boom, he just brings that elbow right over and just drops him. So I think there's, again, not apples to apples, but tons of applicabilities through there as well. So I think we agree in general strokes. And it's always curious to hear different people's perspectives on clinch versus wrestling versus MMA clinch and stuff like that as well.
A lot of it, I mean, my personal experience is that wrestlers, BJJ, whatever rules, always find it very hard to take me down because of my clinch. So I can stay on my feet.
100%. Like there's a running joke in the gym. They call me the Iron Sprawl because they cannot be, I've yet to be taken down, and I will get taken down after proclaiming this. But, there's great wrestlers, like I said, and I have not been able to get taken down during like shoot boxing or even just straight wrestling with those guys because of the fundamentals that I have of the clinch. I've never trained wrestling before in my life. So again, it's not an apples to apples like we are talking about. Can't stand up, super tall. But I think having that ability, it translates a lot easier to MMA clinch, and I think a lot of people realize.
I think the difference is in the cage. If you're clinching, using your clinch stuff in the cage, and you get shoved against the cage walls, then your Muay Thai style clinch stuff starts to become more difficult to do, and you need both. You need a bit of everything. I mean, like I said, I started doing a bit of BJJ because I wanted to get to grips with some of what the MMA guys were doing, and I then realised that actually a lot of the BJJ guys were doing wrestling as well, and realised that actually it's the wrestling style as well, which is BJJ wrestling. A lot of it's similar, different ways of winning the fight, but similar. There's no submissions in wrestling, but the movements and everything else are applicable, and your wrestlers are also effective in that MMA style. So you need to be aware of how things like that work for people. I've taught Muay Thai clinch to a lot of now wrestlers and BJJ practitioners, and they all say, "Wow, the stand-up stuff that you're doing here with the way you're moving your hands and the way you're controlling and all the rest of it is just the same as what we do on the floor. It's a vertical version of what they're doing on the floor, and I think that there's a lot to be said about that. The way you use your body and the way you use their body and the way you use movement and momentum and leverage and mechanics, there's only so many things that work. Mechanics are mechanics, aren't they? Physics is physics, and whether you're standing up, whether you're laying down, or whether you're on your knees, or whatever, it's all going to merge in together, and that's what I've found. So I think the way I probably teach my Muay Thai or coach my Muay Thai now has changed over the last 3 or 4 years, and is constantly developing. That's something I love about this. In Thailand, but I also now love doing my BJJ, doing a bit of wrestling and bringing things in, different training techniques and different fitness training techniques, even if it's not actual combat training techniques. I love all that. So I'm, learning and developing all the time.
I completely agree. One of the things that you said there, clinch being stand-up jiu-jitsu, my fellow Muay Thai coach at Stout, PGH, he says that all the time. He says clinch is just stand-up jiu-jitsu, and he actually allows, I believe it's purple belts and above, to come to our dedicated clinch class because they already have some general foundation for exactly what we're talking about, hand traps and body movement and stuff like that. So he'll be super delighted to hear you say that coming from you, because he says that all the time, and I tend to agree. I focus a lot more on the wrestling element of it than the jiu-jitsu, because like Muay Thai scoring, I look at wrestling as being able to impose your will on the other opponent. So if I want to take you down, I have the ability to do that. If I want to stand up because I'm better and I want to tee off on you with punches and kicks, I have the ability to do that because my wrestling is superior to yours. And in addition, you're talking about, your style evolving over the last 3 to 4 years, but also you mentioned earlier in the call that it has grown leaps and bounds over the prior 10 years. Do you have a dedicated style that you like to train your fighters in? Or, as you talked about before, do you just you train them in the fundamentals? You make sure they're a master of the basics, like I always tell my fighters, be a master of the basics, and then you just see what they're good at, and then gradually sharpen and refine those tools that they're potentially exceptional at, obviously being very hard kicks with Liam Harrison.
Yeah, no, I don't. There's no... You look at Bad Company fighters, you look at my gym's fighters, and from me to Lisa, my wife, who won, she's double world champion, it was a big name in the sport, to Liam, to Jordan, to Andy Howson, to Richard, to all my fighters, James France, you wouldn't recognise one fighter. You wouldn't say, "Oh, that's the Bad Company style. He's a Bad Company fighter," because I think they all have different styles, different strengths. Every human being is different. It's all about, as I said, about physics and mechanics and all the rest of it. And some people's levers are long, some people's levers are short, some people have long legs and short arms, some people have, average of everything, whatever. So there's no point trying to make one. Liam's really good with his low kicks. He's really good with his boxing, but that's not his only game. He can do everything. But then I have other fighters who hardly low kick and don't really like to get close enough to use the left hook and stuff like that. I have fighters who are really good in the clinch. I have fighters who love to kick. It's a case of finding the fighters' strengths and, again, working them on their strengths. There's no point somebody training their weaknesses, really. You need to round your game up. But if you're just spending the whole time training what you're not good at, you're just never going to become as good as you could be. You look at a lot of, again, go back to the Thais. A Thai can become a stadium champion with his left kick. Got a really strong left kick. That's all he does: left kick, timing and power and all the rest of it. And of course, he can handle somebody coming at him with different techniques, but because he keeps banging that left kick in, smashing the left kick, he'll win the fight. A fighter can become a stadium champion by having a strong right hand because it gets all the knockouts, whatever. So you become as good as you can be at what you do, and round your weaknesses off, and you'd be the better fighter than if you spend all your time focusing on the things that you're not good at. Every class I teach, I usually teach a different format and a different style, and we'll work on low kicks one class, we'll work on movement another class, we'll work on boxing another class. And often I'll say to my fighters, look, what we've just done in that class might not suit you and you might never use those techniques, but someone in the class they will work for. And because you've just trained in that now, it gives you an idea of how somebody else might want to fight you if they've got that style. So, every class I teach, every PT I do, every session I do, I'll be working a different style with people, and some things will click and sometimes they'll go away, and I like that, I'm going to work that. Sometimes they might think, that's not really for me, or it doesn't work for me. We'll keep doing it, we'll keep working it. Eventually it'll incorporate into their style or not. But if I've only got one way of doing things, I'm not going to develop. I might be lucky and get the one fighter who suits my one way of doing things, and then that might go far. But other than that, everyone else who's coming to my gym, I can't offer them anything because my style is only a one trick thing. And I think I would like to think that I've proved that that's not the case over the last sort of 25 years of producing fighters. All my fighters have been different for good for different reasons.
I think that's a mark of your mentality too, the beginner's mind mentality, constantly looking to evolve, constantly looking to learn as well, to be able for you to have a comprehension and understanding of all the different techniques, to be able to provide a broad exposure to your fighters and let them gradually gravitate towards what they are best at. Maybe they didn't know they had a hard kick. Maybe they didn't know that they had hard knees or were very elusive, whatever it may be.
Timing.
Yeah, exactly. Timing. I think ultimately that's a function of your mindset as a coach, which I firmly believe in and I firmly applaud. I think I'm a little bit too rigid now that I'm sitting here listening to you, because I was brought up in a very one-way, system of Muay Thai. It's like, this is how we fight. I've gradually adapted as I've grown and evolved. But I think even to this day, now that I'm listening to you, I think I'm a little bit too rigid with my fighters, and I need to kind of give them a little bit more rope to find their own style, their own methodologies, and some frames and references. With that being,
I'm lucky. When I started Muay Thai, I started because I wanted to learn Muay Thai, because I wanted to eventually compete and take part in it. But it wasn't long with the way the gym worked where I started. The coach of that gym moved jobs, and I ended up, I'd only probably been training there a year, when suddenly I was being asked to cover classes, and then I had to start traveling to find my training elsewhere. And actually I was running that gym more or less for that length of time. So my training took a different emphasis sometimes. I would often do a class and think, that style doesn't really work for me, or what I'm doing there, I don't think I'd ever use that in a fight, but I can teach that. So for whenever I did a training session anywhere, whenever I go to Thailand now, whenever I'm learning BJJ now, whenever I'm doing anything else, I'm always thinking, oh, I'll use that in a class. And I'm thinking differently all the time. I'm thinking differently to when someone who's coming to me to learn to be a fighter comes to my gym. He's processing all information for his own personal use. Information that's coming into me, I'm thinking, how can I filter that out? Liam will like that style, or that technique, I'm going to show him that. Or, I'm going to show that style, that technique to Jordan. I'm going to show that technique to Lisa or Matthews or whoever else I've got there. So I'm thinking about what I see in for different reasons. It's not just for my own fighting. And like I said, there's not one way of doing it. I am also very lucky because I have Liam Harrison training in my gym. I have Andy Howson training in my gym. I have these people training and coaching in my gym. Yeah, I've developed them and I've produced them, but then they're also now going off doing their own thing, learning in Thailand and all the rest of it. And I'll often see one of them do something when they're sparring or do something on the pads or whatever, and I'll think, oh, I like that, that's good. I'm going to steal that. You know, equally, I'll be teaching something to Liam one morning when on the pads, and that afternoon I'll walk into the gym and see him doing a PT teaching that thing that I was teaching him this morning. Next thing I'll do is I'll see Liam doing something in the sparring one night, and the following day I'll think, I'll teach that, and I'm teaching that. So it becomes the more depth you have in the gym, you've got more people to look at. If it's just you, then it all comes from you, and you need to go out there and learn more things and keep learning. But once you get the guys and girls in the gym who you can learn from, because I learn from them, they learn from me, and then we're all, iron sharpens iron, doesn't it? We all strengthen one another.
I totally agree. I mean, you said it right there, iron sharpens iron. And then whenever you get that, obviously it starts with you. You're able to produce and provide the launching pad for the fighters like Andy Howson and Liam Harrison. You're able to provide that for them, but ultimately them getting to the next level, then it becomes this symbiosis that you were sort of talking about, to where you're learning from them, they're going out learning from other people, bringing back, they're learning from you. I think that's ultimately the flow state for a gym, but also for the relationship between fighter and coach, to where you're constantly looking to evolve and push limits there as well. With that, is there anyone, you've talked a lot about, the general style of how you train fighters. Is there a particular overarching philosophy that you have in terms of approaching Muay Thai, being aggressive, being defensive first, or anything like that? Or again, is it just, I'll look to see what they're good at and then craft their style or my teaching approach around that for them?
No, you touched on it earlier. You're obviously your basics need to be right. You've got to, if I have a new person coming to the gym, if I have a beginners class, I have a group of new people, I'm going to teach them all the same way. I'm not going to find an individual way of teaching each person. They're going to go through the same way of learning the basics, the same way of learning to throw the jab, throw the right, throw the cross, throw the knee, all those things are just basics that everybody needs to learn. They're the bread and butter of the sport. Once you have learned those basics, how you put them together and which one of them you use the most or you focus on or whatever is a part of developing your own style. So I have initially work on basics, getting good basics. I think the most important thing to me for any style of fighting is footwork. I think if you haven't got good feet, you haven't got a good base, you haven't got good balance, and you haven't got a good movement, it doesn't matter how hard you, no matter how much power a car's got. If it can't grip the road, it's not going to not going to win anything. And similarly with a fighter, it doesn't matter how much power, world class power lifter might have, I might be able to deadlift, 500 kilos, but it doesn't mean that if he punches you, he can catch you to punch you in the face, because he's not got the movement. So my style mainly, I think, is based on footwork, where you are in the ring, and where you are in relation to your opponent. That's probably the most important thing to me. The rest of it depends very much on the fighter or on the athlete that you're coaching. There's no right or wrong answer in boxing, in Muay Thai, in kickboxing or anything. Somebody kicks you, you can punch them back. Somebody kicks you, you can knee them back. Somebody kicks you, you can kick them back. And there's no right or wrong way of doing it. So there's no point me telling somebody they did it wrong. You can't say somebody knocked someone out with a left hook. You can't say should have kicked him because he's knocked him out. So the whole point is that the different ways of building something and different ways you get to the same same result, but in lots of different ways. So, long answer, I think, like I say, footwork, basics and footwork are my most important thing. The rest of it comes from that.
I I agree 100%. I think basics, I was always told by my crew to be a master of the basics. From then you can go out and create your own style, exactly what you sort of were talking about. And then footwork is something, so there's Thai footwork where it sort of falls into Young D being able to have the balance. I always tell my fighters, always be in a position to be able to either give a shot or take a shot and be on balance. But then also the additional wrinkles that you can throw in as you evolve, not just from a combat perspective, but also from a fighter perspective too. So seeing Liam Harrison work more of his boxing, there's a different footwork and rhythm that comes with that, where there's certain ways you can mesh that with Muay Thai, certain ways that you can't. But again, I think another reason why takedowns are difficult for wrestlers on me is because of my boxing footwork, and just a subtle adaptation that you can use that for MMA or for Muay Thai or anything like that. So I think footwork is 100%, just like you said, if you don't have solid footwork, then you're not going to be able to really do anything within the fight. It's like having a sports car, but you've got bald tires on it.
Yeah.
With that, I think the last topic is, how do how's the state of Muay Thai in the UK? So me personally, obviously, I watch it fairly closely with the Yakow fights that go on there, and there's tons of UK fighters with Howson and Harrison fighting internationally, with ONE FC being the most notable. How is the state of Muay Thai in the UK? Is it continuing to grow, or is it seeing a little bit of attrition in terms of MMA? So I think that's kind of the narrative that we see here in the US, although Muay Thai never really hit its stride as the way I think it should. But a lot of the narrative, at least in terms around boxing, is that the new thing that combat athletes, they're going into MMA versus boxing or anything like that. So is the UK seeing that in terms of Muay Thai, or is Muay Thai more popular than it's ever been?
Muay Thai is more popular than it's ever been. It's grown and grown and grown over the last, well, I won't say 20 years, over the last 5 years, exponentially, it's continuing to grow. You've now got your old guard, which I might consider myself in, because I've been around forever, but then, now there's second and third generation people coming through and coaching and running their own gyms, who have had a lot of experience. The sport is developing at grassroots level in this country very well, because we have a really good junior circuit. There are promoters out there who only promote junior events. A guy called Pete Spensley, he's one who comes to mind straight away. But there are a lot of junior events now, a lot of kids coming through, and we've got a pretty much a formula now for what's considered acceptable for junior fights. No head contact up to 16 years old, shin pads, body armor. Different. You need to learn to adapt. It's like I say about Muay Thai being all about effect. Well, it's hard to have an effect on somebody when you're not punching them in the face and you're wearing body armor and shin pads. So fighters do need to learn to adapt. They're learning a different sport, but we now have some really good juniors in this country. If you went to any of the junior shows that are happening week in, week out in the UK, you see the level of some of the fights is really good. And we're starting to get, like Jonathan Haggerty came through that junior circuit. He now is, they're competing at, very top level and getting better and stronger. We've got other fighters who are coming through from that circuit now. So one of the things that we've always said about Thailand is, it's in their blood. They started when they were 6 years old. They were having the first fights when they were 8 years old, and they've grown up with it. Well, we now have fighters in the UK who similarly started at that age. There's a lot of things get in the way, and sometimes kids get to become a teenager and they drift off and go do something else that was never going to be their thing. But we are getting fighters now who are coming through. So we are getting, as I said, about the depth in the gym. We're getting depth in this country as well. We're getting, lots of really high level, really good fighters coming through from that. Promotions, there's 3 or 4 shows every weekend somewhere in the UK, in Scotland, in Wales, in England, all over the place. Fighters are getting better. There are more gyms. Some are good, some are not good. The good ones tend to rise, and the not so good ones tend to fall away. But it's very healthy, yeah, very healthy.
That's amazing to hear, and to hear that there is a junior circuit so dedicated like that is amazing. I don't think there's anything of a similar caliber within this particular country outside of like that Olympic gateway for boxing, and to be able to begin to produce people along that particular realm. With Jonathan Haggerty being one of the great examples. His first fight with Rodtang is one of the sample fights that I have all my students do film study on, particularly in rounds 1 and 2, because his teep was so effective and his ring generalship was so effective. Rodtang did not know what to do with him. So if you're seeing more and more of that come out of this particular circuit, I think that's only going to be amazing for UK sports.
Yeah. I mean, at the moment, there's a benchmark, I suppose, is IFMA. There's IFMA Junior Championships, and then that IFMA Senior Adult Championships, and Team GB are going over there. And at the moment, we're not really making a mark on the medals. I mean, actually, in the IFMA Junior Championships, not last year, year before, USA did really well. In fact, the US with Brian Dobler, with the team USA are doing really well in the IFMA Junior Championships. You've got some good kids coming through. So I think that is happening there at grassroots level for you in the States as well. But I don't think the organisation in the UK and the backing for the associations that work with IFMA is as good as it could be in the UK yet. So we're not really pushing fighters out into the IFMA circuit as much as we should be. There are some fighters who are not on that circuit that could be. So I think IFMA is the benchmark for that sort of amateur level of body armour, shin pads and all that. And that's starting to grow now in the UK. And once that does, I think we'll hit another level on the sort of international circuit.
Yeah. So this conversation has been amazing. I know we can probably go for another half hour, another full hour, but I want to be respectful. I know this is your break time and got to get back to the gym. Richard, this has been an amazing conversation. I look forward to hopefully having an additional conversation sometime in the future, because quite frankly, how you guys are doing it at Bad Company Gym, but also in the UK, is definitely a model for how our gym, but also how I want to see more and more gyms within the US gradually gravitate towards being able to pump out high-level Muay Thai fighters.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. And obviously, anytime you want to talk again or any more information, just get in touch with me. Anyone listening as well, I'm always there. If anyone who wants any advice, you can drop me a message on Instagram or Facebook, whatever. So, yeah, I'm always here.
Awesome. I'll make sure that I include your Instagram handle, your Facebook. If you have a Twitter as well, I'll make sure I grab that, include that. I'll include the link to the Bad Company Gym. And yeah, anyone that's looking to get more information, especially any listeners that are based over in the UK or near Leeds, obviously the podcast will speak for itself in terms of why you should be, having a conversation with Richard. So without further ado, Richard, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for listening. And I'll see you next time on the Crypto Muay Thai podcast.